Hey, what's up, everyone? I thought I would put together a video here describing my experiences at the Las Vegas Open for 2024, specifically the Batman Miniatures game, share my thoughts on the crew that I ran, which was Danny DeVito Penguin, how it runs, and then also my overall thoughts on the tournament itself and the event itself. So, hope you guys enjoy, and thanks for watching. So we'll start with the event itself, which is the Las Vegas Open. This is held every January in Las Vegas, as the name implies, and it's one of the highlights of my gaming career, as it were. I really like to attend LVO. I like to be in Vegas with my friends, find good places to eat, do a little bit of gambling, and then of course play miniature games. And typically when I go to LVO, I am a little different in that I want to play in different events. I would prefer not to just, commit to one system or one main tournament for the weekend. Now, unfortunately, that was not an option this year, as the scheduling for Malifaux, unfortunately, was not available. So it was Batman the whole year. And don't get me wrong, I love the Batman Miniatures game. It's one of my favorite games, as you may know. And I'm happy to play it at LVO. It actually is one of the best times to play it there. But I was hoping to play maybe a second system as well. That said, this year was a particular treat in that we had a number of folks coming down from the infamous Minnesota meta for the Batman Miniatures game. And for those of you who are not in the know, the Minnesota playgroup really has a prominent space in the Batman Miniatures game. You have some folks that are playtesters, or you have folks that are maybe a little bit more involved with how the game is put together and submitting feedback to Night Models. Not to say that they don't that they listen to everything that comes out of the Minnesota group, but they definitely do have at least some contact with Night, and therefore are also very knowledgeable about the game and very experienced. So they host a number of fantastic events in Minnesota, and one of these days I would love to be able to sort of unchain myself from the family responsibilities and head out there to the Midwest and get in some games with these incredibly experienced and talented players. So this year was going to be a challenge on a couple of fronts. One being that really it was going to be Batman all weekend, and two, really coming up against what I consider to be the best of the best at the game. So as per typical, my friends and I here locally in Southern California, we start playing Batman. We play. Geez, I don't care to admit it, but it's north of 20 different gaming systems every year, and so we kind of play these games in seasons. And so Batman season tends to be towards the end of the year as we're gearing up for LVO. So it's been a long enough intro. Let's go ahead and cut to the chase here and get into my crew build for Danny DeVito Penguin, which is where I landed, and I'm nicknaming this particular build Everything Everywhere All at Once. Okay, so let's get into the Danny DeVito crew and some features of it and why I chose to run it. Now, back to last year, I actually had some interest in bringing Penguin to LVO. Penguin has been a perennial favorite of mine, and as the timing would work out, Danny DeVito came out pretty shortly after I made that decision. And up until then, I was running a lot of Comic Book Penguin and AK Penguin. And Penguin is probably really cool in the sense that he has a lot of different versions, and the versions I find play pretty differently. Specifically, like AK Penguin is quite a departure, and Emperor Penguin is really a large departure from, say, your Comic Book Penguin and Danny DeVito Penguin, which are more similar in the sense that they both run the expendable penguins as part of their crew. So unlike Comic Book Penguin, who can take the duck, which is a pretty fantastic upgrade on its own. Danny Devito Penguin cannot take the duck. However, he has a couple of specific rules, one being Mayor Cobblepot, and the other being Hidden Penguins, which is a slightly different version of the penguin rule that Comic Book Penguin runs. Devito Penguin also has a couple of solid ranged options, one being a machine gun with a red dot, which is fantastic. It's a rate of fire 3 with a red dot, and also a flamer umbrella, which is pretty useful in some situations and builds as well. The nice thing too is his umbrellas give him protective, which will help make up for some of the defensive ability that you may have lost with the duck. And instead of Protect Me, he has Mayor Cobblepot, which I think is actually a better protective rule, in that it, unlike Protect Me, it can get around things like sneak attack. Devito Penguin also deploys his penguins differently. He doesn't get to move them for a special the way Comic Book Penguin does, and we'll get into a little bit of that later. And also, he has access to Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman, which was part of my testing at one point. Unfortunately, she did not land in this particular build. I thought that Vengeance with her is actually really good. However, this particular build, she was not part of. Devito also has the ability to convert the long game objective card from a 2VP to a 3VP, and this is a huge advantage that he has over the other penguins, because it raises his entire deck scoring ceiling to a maximum score of 70 VP, which is insanely high. It's quite good, and it's something that you're going to want to take advantage of if you are running Danny Devito Penguin. Alright, so for the crew, what I decided to do was take several penguins. I chose specifically 3 of the suicide bomb penguins and 3 of the minigun penguins. Now, the minigun penguins, in my opinion, are a no-brainer. If you're taking either one of Danny Devito or the Comic Penguin, you're going to want to run max minigun penguins. They're just absolutely so useful and terrifying to deal with on the board. Your opponent is going to want to have to deal with that sort of threat saturation that they provide. The Suicide Penguins are fantastic in that they're super cheap. Their bodies on the board for Devito Penguin specifically, you're going to want to put them near those sewers and kind of spread them out. Maybe keep one nearby Devito's starting location as a ad hoc bodyguard, but in general you're going to want them around the board to score your territory fights for you. These are small penguins that your opponent's probably not going to want to spend much time attacking unless they're just going to score a free casualty or KO card or damage card or something like that. In addition, I like to take bikers, kind of for that same reason, is that they can cover large parts of the board. They can, especially Biker 2 can go up and with his handyman perform a free manipulate. That can be useful for things like your smuggled goods, trying to get that, or just trying to get more suspects on the board, which is going to be important for your the long game. But the bikers don't don't forget that you can actually put out some pretty good attacks with them. Now, you're not going to be scoring things for casualty or KO, so you can't score your dirty jobs if you're taking anything like that. However, you can still perform ranged attacks so that you can score Penguin's ranged attack card. And, damage is always good where you can put it. So Biker 2 specifically, and there's the other, the pistol biker, who can put out additional ranged attacks. Instinctive shooting on that biker is fantastic. And then the other biker, I believe he's Biker 1, who has the handy heavy blood stun bat. Don't underestimate how good that can be, or useful that can be, just to take out an opponent. And also don't forget that you've got the mobster rule, which is going to be very useful there as well. And speaking of mobsters, my favorite mobster to run, who's probably going to end up in just about every single penguin crew is your assault rifle mobster. Just incredibly dangerous to have that on the board. Experienced players are going to see him and try to take him out as quickly as possible. So that's not the bad thing. That's not the worst thing in the world, though. Don't forget you can use the long game resource to bring him back if you need to. But just having that as a threat on the board and making sure your opponent either has to deal with him or they're going to suffer some really painful consequences if they don't, that's very useful. So I like to have him on the board. I also like to have some of the cheaper ones on the board. The one with the laser light is fantastic, and I also, even some of the bikers on occasion will end up on the board. I took the cheap biker with the handy heavy maul and the laser light guy as well. And I also like to have the Penguin Elite Duck for a similar reason too, just because he's very mobile. He's got defense 4, which is fantastic, and his baton is very underrated. When that thing can land a crit, it's pretty nasty. And again, taking advantage of the mobster rule, so none of these models are completely irreplaceable. You can bring them back along with your penguin. So that's a lot of models that you can keep on the board. You can keep the board saturated, keep areas covered to score your big 3-point objectives. Now for the free agent choices, this is where I actually did the most amount of experimentation. Devito Penguin does have the charismatic rule, which is very enticing. There's a lot of fun free agents you can put in here, especially with the Penguin Associates. Mr. Toxic is fantastic. But the original build was to have Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman in there because she is exclusive to Devito, and Killer Croc. So I was running those two. Now that it's a very effective pair of free agents. However, Killer Croc has a hefty price tag. Don't get me wrong, he is absolutely brilliant, and if you take him with Pfeiffer, you've got Dirty Job in your objective deck, and you can just score those like mad. You also get Lord of the Sewers, which is great for your penguins. But one thing a couple things I had with Killer Croc that were turnoffs was just his price tag, the fact that he's gonna reduce your overall amount of activations, because you're going to want to be scoring a lot and putting a lot of objective cards into play, and the fact that he isn't irreplaceable. I know he's very hard to kill with his sewer escape mechanism, his super high endurance, and his other protective tech that he has, but when he does go down, and good opponents will know how to put him down pretty quickly, that's a lot of your points down the drain, and it's again, fewer activations. Similar situation for Michelle Pfeiffer. I think she's fantastic, and she actually should be in most Devito builds, but my particular build, I decided to opt not to take her in favor of the free agent that I landed on, which was Ratcatcher, who I think fulfills pretty much a lot of the things that I was talking about. Ratcatcher gets you a lot of extra activations. He's got the rat swarms. It's like having another replaceable version of those suicide penguins. So it's, that can cover the board. They can fulfill criteria for territory fight. They can bodyguard for Ratcatcher, making Ratcatcher and Danny DeVito really the only two models that can't be replaced. But both of them are very well protected between rat swarms, and DeVito can actually Mayor Cobblepot his way onto any model, any friendly model within 4 inches of him. So I really felt that Ratcatcher, with Lord of the Sewers and everything else that he's providing, plus he can even put down a 6th sewer marker onto the board, was absolutely perfect for my overall strategy here. Alright, so let's talk about that objective deck here for a minute. It was really cool that LVO allowed a 6-card sideboard, but I ended up not using my sideboard. Let's get into the features of the Penguin deck, though, and where my everything everywhere all at once strategy sort of kicks in. So, like I was saying before, Devito Penguin specifically has an incredibly high VP ceiling. He's got a 70 VP ceiling, which means he has 10 cards that score at 3 VP apiece, and they're 3 different objectives. And on their surface, it can be kind of daunting to think you're trying to get all of this done in the space of one turn per se, right? So one of the cards is smuggled goods. This one is very dependent on your deployments. So you're supposed to place the smuggled goods marker within 8 inches of an enemy deployment zone. You and your opponent can both manipulate this marker to move it. Your opponent moves it 4 inches, and you move it 2 plus X, where X is your business, right? And so this marker. So if you do it late in the turn, you've got a lot of business. You can move this marker, 6, 7, 8 inches, which is fantastic. And that's kind of your goal. You kind of, at the most, you want to manipulate this once, maybe twice a turn, and ending up on a poor deployment map, that's where things can hurt. You really would prefer not to use many manipulates to get this across the board. So that's 1-3. The other 3 is Territory Fight, which used to be a really hard card to score, especially if you're running like AK Penguin or something like that, where the board used to be in quadrants. Now this is where you and your opponent place Territory Fight markers on the board. There are some rules, like they have to be ground level, and they can't be in a deployment zone or within 5 inches of a table edge. And as written, really that applies to your opponent. So really you have your opponent's gotta they have to figure out, they have to be thinking about board geometry, and where trying to put you in inopportune places or spread you out to a point where it's going to be very hard for you to reach those areas of the board. So again, this is where your bikers, your penguins, and your rats and those extra sewers really come in handy, trying to get to areas of the board where your opponent is going to try to force you over to for Territory Fight. And then finally, for Penguin, Danny DeVito Penguin, you have the long game, which is, on its surface sounds kind of easy. Just have 2 more suspects down than your opponent when you place one, but that's 3 points, and so you're trying to dominate the suspect game, which is easy against certain opponents. It can be difficult against other opponents, like say Riddler or League of Assassins. That's where they run really suspect heavy types of objectives, so that can be a tough one there. And this is kind of where everything everywhere all at once kind of happens, right? You need to have everything, meaning lots of suspects everywhere, meaning you need to be smuggling goods across the board, you need to be winning territory fights, and you need to do all of that all at once while you're running all of your other objectives as well. Now, the good news is Penguin's other objectives are pretty simple and they overlap pretty well, like just revealing a suspect, or placing timers down on specific suspects. Those are all pretty easy, and there's other ones too, like the hidden equipment bases. That overlaps pretty well with territory fight. The not buying, don't touch also overlaps very well, so you're gonna want to run pretty suspect heavy when you're doing this. And again, lots of bodies everywhere. Have a good spread of the board. There are other Penguin cards, like Everyone Has a Price, that I frankly don't make it into my deck. I mean, it's a little situational, trying to score some hits on an outnumbered opponent. Easier to do with Mobster and Tough Guy and that sort of thing, but it's just not, it doesn't overlap with the overall plan, so that doesn't make it in. I also don't take a Collector of Goods because I look at those plot style cards as kind of a detriment. You're essentially stockpiling cards that could have been points scored, and so I'm not a big fan of having that on the board either. And as I mentioned too, I was playing for a while with Michelle Pfeiffer and having Dirty Job in there, which does overlap pretty well, especially if you're trying to get a bunch of ranged attacks out. So that can be useful, but I'm finding, if I wanted the other activations, I wanted Ratcatcher in there really to solve a bunch of these problems. Now, you could run Ratcatcher and Michelle Pfeiffer together alternately, and I think that's actually a pretty fun, viable build. It gives you a lot of flexibility, and you're taking advantage of the killing power that you already have, and that's also quite good. However, for my strategy was I was worried about running into these like Goliath crews where I couldn't actually finish anything off, or at least without any severe difficulty. So just being spread around the board and having a good amount of suspects on the board was plenty for me. Now, the funny thing about all of this is you really have to think about map geometry when you're looking at these. When you're going into your matchups, when you're looking at the boards, I'm already thinking, okay, where are some places they can put these territory fight markers that are just going to be an absolute pain for me to get at? What if they, put their sewer markers in weird spots and I can't take advantage of that? So I'm thinking about stuff like that. If they pick certain deployments like the single corner deployment types, those are super bad also for things like smuggled goods, because that means now you're going to have to manipulate that multiple times. Whereas if they take things like news flies, it's basically 9 points that you're going to score as long as those cards are in your hand. So obviously there is a ton to think about, plus your sideboard. And for my sideboard, I'm feeling ill, because that's a no-brainer. You're going to want to remove things like fire, things like stunned from critical models when you need to. You're also going to want valuable commodities as a hand flush towards the end of the turn to make sure you get your smuggled goods, because that's a phase 2. And then I like They Must Know Pain, because it's kind of versatile. You can wake up a model from KO, which is a detriment. If they're knocking out critical penguins but not removing them, that's difficult because it's very difficult to wake them up. So I like to have that on the board. It also can remove damage markers in a pinch, so you don't absolutely need the first aid one. And in fact, I choose the out of activation. I'm forgetting the names of cards right now, guys. I'm sorry, but the one that moves a model that it currently isn't active 3 inches on one of your own turns. That's super useful too, because that can be like a last second change when your opponent thinks they have your territory fight beat and you have a model just out of position. You can use that resource to just slide that model back in late in the turn, which I did pull a couple of times over the course of the day, and some opponents found that to be frustrating. So your sideboard also really critical to be aware of. And again, like I said, everything everywhere all at once.